The Ghost in the Mirror. Old mirrors are creepy. Maybe it's how their tarnished surfaces distort your reflections, or perhaps it is the feeling that they've witnessed centuries of history and are holding on to memories. Emily didn't believe any of that stuff until she brought one home. She bought it as an impulse purchase at a local flea market. The glass itself was a little bit misty. But that didn't matter. It was perfect. That wasn't enough to stop her. Emily loves everything with a past, and this was the precise mirror for her home. She had just moved into the old Victorian house on the fringe of town, a fixer-upper that still carried the smell of dust and age. Its creaking floors and high ceilings gave it an eerie beauty that Emily found enchanting. The mirror seemed the perfect complement to its worn charm. It had been a long day of renovations, and she hung the mirror in the hallway just outside her bedroom. As she stepped back to admire it, she felt a slight chill in the air, though the windows were closed and the heat was on. Shrugging, she decided it was time for bed. The house had its quirks, after all. That night, Emily woke up to the tinkle of footsteps echoing down the hallway. Half asleep, she rolled back over in her bed thinking she had left the TV on. But still, all was silent. Then again she heard it. Soft, deliberate footfalls, as if somebody were pacing right outside her door. She felt her heart start to pound. She sat up in the bed, straining to listen. The sound stopped. She waited with her eyes glued on the door, half expecting to see the knob turn, but nothing happened. She sat there for a few minutes of silence, gradually convincing herself that it was just the old house settling down, and went ahead to try to fall asleep again. The next morning, Emily noticed something was odd with the mirror. She had seen a faint smudge next to the center of the glass, and it hadn't been there the day before. Emily easily wiped it away, figuring it was from handling the mirror in its placement. She was cleaning across the surface, where she found something disquieting. Faint handprints, as though someone had pressed palms onto the glass from inside. Emily froze, her fingers hesitating millimeters above the mirror's surface. The handprints were too small to be hers, and no one else could have touched it. She was alone. She shivered as she briskly backed away from the mirror. That night, steps came back. This time they were louder, more insistent. Emily lay in bed, clutching the sheets as the pacing continued outside her door. Her pulse quickened, and she thought about calling somebody over. Literally anybody. And then she reconsidered. No sense sounding crazy. What was she going to say? Oh, yeah, my mirror is haunted? Still, the steps went on. They moved from the corridor to the foot of her bed and back again, as if the person was looking for something. Emily sat up, touched the switch of the bedside lamp on. There was no one in the room, nothing apart from the deep silence of night. She thought of the mirror hanging in the hallway, and how her blood ran cold. It was so dimly lit that she saw something moving behind the glass. It stood through the distorted outline, watching her in the reflection. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She blinked, hoping it was only her exhausted mind playing tricks, but it stayed there. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, staring. She sprang out of bed and ran down the hallway, flipping on every light that she passed. By the time she'd gotten to the mirror, the apparition had vanished, but the handprints were still there, and much clearer, more pronounced, and two sets instead of one. There was a big one and a little one. Emily's skin was prickling with fear. She didn't know how or why, but something was wrong with the mirror. Whatever was inside it wasn't human. And from day to day, the happenings increased in their intensity. No longer were the steps just an occasional happening, but a steady presence that reverberated through the house at all hours of the day and night. Objects began to move on their own. Books had been knocked off shelves. Doors opened and closed. But the mirror was the worst. Every time Emily looked into the glass, the figure stood there, closer than last time. It never moved, yet it seemed as though it was watching her, waiting for something. And the handprints. So many handprints stretched across the glass, as if a crowd of unseen hands were pressing against the other side, trying to break through. Emily tried to run the mirror out of her life. She pulled it off the wall and dragged it down to the basement, and covered it with an old sheet. Strangely enough, though, the odd occurrences still had not ceased. At night, she could hear the hammering feet, louder now, and feel the oppressive feeling of being watched. Desperate, she went online to find any explanation she could. Stories of haunted mirrors filled her screen. Tales of spirits trapped in glass and unable to move on. Some say mirrors are portals, gateways between the living and dead. Others warn of something darker entities, which could reach through and pull the unsuspecting into their world. It was now that Emily feared she realized what she'd brought into her house. For the mirror wasn't just haunted, it was a doorway, and something on the other side wanted to come through. She lay there that night and could not sleep. Each groan of the floorboards, each whisper of the wind created a cacophony that threatened to consume her. She stared at the ceiling and did not dare shut her eyes. And then, sometime after midnight, she heard something. It was a quiet tapping sound, fingernails rapping on glass. Emily's heart was banging into her throat. She didn't want to look. She knew she would see, but something pushed her out of bed. She moved slowly forward toward the hallway, her feet dragging against her. The tapping grew louder and more insistent until it deafened her. When she hit the door to the basement, she stopped. The tapping was coming from below, from the mirror. She had to see. She had to know. With shaking hands, she fumbled for the door latch and flung it wide, too terrified to look back. Then, on the stairs, was crawling down into darkness, where the air was thick with dust, and the stench of mildew hung over everything, hiding the shape of the mirror draped with a sheet in a far corner. The tapping ceased. Emily stood stock still in the entrance at the bottom of the stairs, looking at the covered mirror. She wanted to run, leave the house, and never come back, but she couldn't. Something kept her there. Tremulously, she reached out and pulled the sheet away. The mirror was clean. No handprints, no figure. There was just her, staring back. Relief flooded through her, and she laughed, a shaking sound. All in her head, she thought, just stress and exhaustion playing tricks. But then, as she turned, she saw it. Her reflection didn't move. It stood still, eyes wide and open, only to watch her. Then, slowing, it smiled. Emily screamed, but no sound escaped her lips. Her reflection stretched out a hand towards the glass to press against it. She stumbled back, but it was too late. The mirror shattered. In the stillness that followed, there was only the soft echo of footsteps receding into the darkness.